Welcome to Top 10 Secret. Today, join us as we uncover 10 spine-chilling and terrifying stories about night guards and mysterious spirits. Tales that will make your skin crawl and leave you afraid to be alone at night. Get ready, because the horror is about to begin. Story 1. The Night Keeper of Souls, nightfall, enveloped a long-forgotten forest. Here, sunlight was but a myth. Towering ancient trees obscured everything, casting a cold, suffocating gloom. In this shadowy realm, the legend of the Night Keeper of Souls spread like a curse. It is said that, when darkness descends, he appears in the shadows, carrying a bizarre lantern emitting an eerie green glow. Inside the lantern are ghastly skulls, each one the imprisoned soul of a cursed being condemned for eternity. Legend has it that the Night Keeper of Souls was once an ordinary man. His name was Elias, a poor farmer struggling to make a living in the village of Arden. Elias was kind-hearted, but on one fateful day, he was falsely accused of murder for the sake of coins he had never even touched. The villagers, manipulated by a mysterious stranger, dragged him into the forest at dusk, branding him as a sinner and cursing him to an eternal existence in darkness. Through a sinister ritual, Elias's soul was torn from his body and bound to the cursed lantern. He became the Night Keeper of Souls, a wanderer in the shadows, harvesting the souls of the unfortunate and wicked as a grim retaliation against fate. The forest where Elias was cursed became a realm of horror. Nearby villagers called it the Forest of Death. Whispering voices, maniacal laughter, and flickering green lights at night made the place a breeding ground for chilling legends. Those who ventured into the forest rarely returned. Occasionally, bodies were found, pale as though drained of life, with hollow, lifeless eyes staring into nothingness. One fateful night, a group of 4 travelers decided to take a shortcut through the forest to reach a nearby city. They were skeptics, mocking the tales. "Ghostly souls are nothing but bedtime stories," one of them sneered. But the moment they entered the forest, an oppressive sensation overcame them. Faint screams echoed from deep within, followed by faint flickering green lights. They froze, one of them trembling as he pointed at the eerie glow. The figure slowly emerged. It was a skeletal being with hollow sockets burning with flames, holding the cursed lantern. Terrified, the group turned back, but the forest seemed like an endless labyrinth. Each attempt to flee brought the lantern closer, its green light swallowing everything. By morning, villagers discovered the bodies of the 4 travelers. They appeared alive, but with empty, soulless eyes. In the distance, the sound of haunting laughter echoed, and the shadow of the lantern-bearer vanished into the mist. The legend of the Night Keeper of Souls continued to spread, leaving terror in the hearts of those who dared to listen. When you see a green light in the darkness, never look back, for it may be the last glimpse you ever have of this world. Story 2. The Wedding of the Damned. Long ago, the remote village of Blackwood carried a curse that no one dared to speak of. At its center, perched atop a desolate hill, stood an ancient church, a silent witness to centuries of terror. No one dared approach it, especially at night. The elders whispered that on nights of the full moon, the church became the stage for a haunting wedding ceremony where the bride and groom did not belong to this world. Emily Carter, a curious young woman visiting the village, dismissed these tales as mere superstition. Her adventurous spirit and stubborn curiosity led her to the brink of tragedy. That fateful night, lured by the mysterious whispers carried on the wind, she decided to step inside the church to uncover the truth. The heavy wooden door creaked ominously as Emily pushed it open. Inside, the pale moonlight filtered through shattered stained glass windows, casting eerie patterns on the walls. The air was thick, suffocating, as if an unseen force pressed down on her. In the center of the church stood an altar covered in dust, Yet atop it sat a wooden box, ornately carved and eerily pristine, untouched by time. As Emily approached the box, the air grew colder. A chilling voice echoed, soft yet piercing. "You have arrived." Just as I expected. Emily turned around sharply. Standing in the shadows was a tall figure in an old, tattered wedding suit. His face was a stark white skull, his empty eye sockets glowing with an otherworldly darkness. "I am your groom," he whispered, "and you have been chosen to fulfill this curse." The groom began to speak, his voice resonating like the cries of countless tormented souls. He revealed that centuries ago, Emily's ancestors had betrayed him on his wedding day. They had killed him and his bride-to-be, cursing his soul to wander eternally. Over time, he'd become the ruler of shadows, waiting for a new bride to complete the ceremony that was stolen from him. "You have no choice," he said, his hollow eyes fixed on her. "If you refuse, your entire town, your family, everyone you love, will be dragged into the depths of hell with me." Before her eyes, visions of her loved ones appeared, writhing in agony, engulfed by the fiery pits of hell. Despite the terror, Emily refused to submit. "I won't let you control me," she screamed defiantly. He laughed, a sound that reverberated through the church like a sinister melody. "Then you will face the consequences." With a wave of his skeletal hand, the church shook violently. The ground cracked open, and cursed souls clawed their way out, shrieking as they tried to drag Emily down. But she refused to give in. Remembering her grandmother's words, she lunged toward the altar where the wooden box lay. Inside, she found a small silver mirror, an object the groom had hidden, containing all his power. Grasping the mirror tightly, she turned it toward him. "This is your end," she shouted, then hurled it to the ground. The glass shattered, releasing a blinding light that burned away the shadows consuming the church. The groom screamed in agony as his body disintegrated into ash. The cursed souls around her dissolved one by one. Leaving behind a profound silence, Emily stumbled out of the church, exhausted but relieved, believing that it was finally over. But strange things began happening in the days that followed. Each night, she dreamt of herself standing at the altar in a ghostly white wedding dress. The skeletal groom stood beside her, whispering dark promises. One day, while looking into her mirror, Emily noticed her eyes had changed. Deep black pools that mirrored the emptiness of his sockets. From within the mirror, a familiar voice echoed. "Did you truly think you could escape me? Your soul belongs to me now. Our wedding has only just begun." The door to her room slammed shut. A cold wind enveloped her, and darkness swallowed the space. From that day on, Emily was never seen again. Her home became eerily silent, its windows perpetually shuttered. Villagers passing by swore they heard a man's chilling laughter echoing from within on moonlit nights. Legend has it that if you dare step into the church on the hill during a full moon, you'll hear the faint sound of wedding music in the distance. And if you're brave enough to peer inside, you'll see a beautiful bride in a white dress smiling as she waits, with her groom from the depths of hell. Story 3. The Silent Wings of a Guardian. Anna sat curled up on the steps of an abandoned building, rain seeping into her thin clothes and her soul alike. The world had turned its back on her. Everyone she had ever trusted, friends, lovers, even herself, had betrayed her. Anna felt as though she were slipping into an endless abyss where no light could reach. Amid the sound of rain, a gentle voice broke through. "You are not alone." Anna turned abruptly. A man stood before her, his presence almost otherworldly. Massive white wings spread out behind him, soft and ethereal, glowing faintly in the dim light. His face was calm, serene, but his eyes, his deep, knowing eyes, were filled with an understanding she had never seen in anyone before. "Who are you?" Anna asked, her voice trembling. "I am a guardian," he replied, his tone warm yet tinged with a mysterious gravity. "I came because you called me even though you didn't realize it." They sat in silence for a long time before the guardian spoke again. "You think you want someone real, don't you? But the truth is, you're afraid of that." Anna looked at him, confused. "Afraid? I just want someone honest, someone who truly sees me for who I am." "But you don't understand how terrifying that can be," he said, his gaze never wavering. "When you face someone truly honest, they hold nothing back. Not the good, not the bad. They'll force you to confront the darkest parts of yourself, the things you've tried so hard to bury." Anna wanted to argue, but she couldn't. Deep down, she knew he was right. "That's why most people run," he continued. "They say they want honesty, but when it stares back at them, they can't handle it. They're too scared of the truth, both in others and in themselves." "So what do you want from me?" Anna whispered, a growing unease swelling in her chest. The guardian was silent for a long moment before answering. "I want you to face yourself, to confront your fears, your pain, and the darkness inside you. Only then can you truly live." Anna felt a chill run down her spine. Her body seemed frozen, as if the air itself had turned to ice. The guardian rose, his wings spreading wide. But something had changed. The light emanating from him began to dim, and his voice grew colder, almost haunting. "But are you ready to face the truth, Anna? Because once you cross this threshold, there's no going back." Beneath her feet, the ground began to crack, revealing a yawning void of blackness. Anna's heart pounded wildly, but a strange curiosity rooted her in place. "I'm ready," she said, her voice barely audible but resolute. The guardian smiled, but his smile was no longer kind. It twisted, becoming something grotesque. His eyes, once warm and understanding, turned as black as the void beneath her feet. His once pristine wings began to wither, their white feathers crumbling to ash. Anna wanted to scream, but she found she couldn't move. "I am not just a guardian, Anna," he whispered, his voice echoing from everywhere and nowhere. "I am the embodiment of everything you've denied. I am the darkness within you, the part of yourself you fought to forget. And now I've found my way back." Pain exploded in her chest. Anna felt as though something was clawing its way out of her, a dark, writhing force that had been dormant for far too long. In the reflection of a rain puddle at her feet, she saw her eyes had changed. Deep, black voids that mirrored his own. "You called to me, and now I'm here to stay," he whispered, his voice brushing against her ear. "From this moment on, you'll never be alone again. But you'll also never truly be yourself." Anna disappeared that night. No one in the town ever saw her again. But the abandoned building where she had sat became a place of whispered legend. Those who dared to venture close swore they could hear a voice in the wind, whispering eerie invitations. "You want the truth? Come closer and face the darkness within yourself." On rainy nights, if you're brave or foolish enough to look, you might see her. A girl with void black eyes and wings that crumble into ash, sitting silently, waiting for someone bold enough to face the truth she could not escape. Story 4. The Curse of the School. Linwood High School, nestled deep in a remote countryside, had been abandoned for over 30 years, but the chilling stories surrounding it never faded. Decades ago, a horrific event left the school shrouded in darkness and fear, its name whispered in dread. 30 years prior, a young teacher named Miss Evelyn Harper, only 24 years old, was found hanging in a classroom at the end of the second-floor hallway. She had been beloved for her kindness and dedication to her students, which made her tragic death even more unsettling. Some said she had been falsely accused of wrongdoing by a vengeful parent, driving her to despair. Others believed she had been cursed or possessed by an evil force lurking within the school. From that day forward, strange occurrences plagued the building. Echoing footsteps in empty hallways, flickering red lights at the far end of corridors, and distorted laughter at night led the school to be permanently shut down. It became a place avoided by everyone, except for those bold or foolish enough to test its legend. Ethan, Sam, Emily, and Sarah were a group of friends who shared a peculiar hobby: exploring haunted locations. One chilly autumn night, bathed in pale moonlight, they decided to take on their latest challenge: investigating Linwood High. "It's just a bunch of scary stories," Ethan scoffed as they stood before the rusted iron gates of the school. "Yeah," Sam agreed, though his shaky hands betrayed his nerves. "We'll go in, get some videos, and be out in no time." Emily, the most reluctant of the group, glanced nervously at the dark building. "I don't know, you guys. The stories about this place are really creepy." "Which makes it perfect," Sarah grinned, her flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. Pushing open the creaking gate, they stepped into the overgrown courtyard. The sound of the gate swinging shut behind them echoed unnaturally, sending a shiver down Emily's spine. Inside, the school was a tomb of decay. Cracked walls, moss-covered floors, and a thick layer of dust painted a picture of abandonment. A faint metallic scent lingered in the air, mingling with the damp smell of mold. "The second floor," Sam said, his voice barely above a whisper. "That's where the red light is supposed to appear." As they climbed the stairs, the atmosphere grew heavier, almost suffocating. The second-floor hallway stretched out before them like a dark abyss. The doors to the classrooms were closed, though a few shattered windows allowed streaks of moonlight to seep through. At the far end of the corridor, a faint red glow began to flicker. "Do you see that?" Sarah whispered, clutching Ethan's arm. "It's probably just some reflection or something," Ethan muttered, trying to sound brave. They moved cautiously down the hallway, their footsteps echoing unnaturally. Then, breaking the silence, came the sound of laughter. It was faint at first, childlike, but wrong. It was distorted, as if something inhuman were mimicking the sound of laughter without understanding how. "Did you hear that?" Emily whispered, gripping Sam's sleeve. "It's probably the wind," Sam said, though his voice cracked slightly. The laughter grew louder, echoing off the walls. Ethan swung his flashlight toward the sound, but the beam only illuminated the empty, decaying classrooms. "This isn't funny," Sarah muttered, her voice trembling. As they neared the glowing red light at the end of the hallway, they finally saw her. A girl stood in the middle of the room, her back to them. Her long hair obscured her face, and she wore a white dress stained with what looked like dried blood. "Excuse me, are you okay?" Ethan asked hesitantly, his flashlight aimed at her back. The girl didn't move. Then, slowly, she turned. Her face was horrifyingly disfigured. Her skin stretched taut, her eyes glowing bright red, and her mouth impossibly wide, filled with sharp, jagged teeth. "You shouldn't have come here," she hissed, her voice a haunting blend of whispers and screams. Before they could react, the girl lunged toward them with inhuman speed. "Run!" Ethan yelled, grabbing Emily's hand. The group scattered, sprinting back down the hallway, but the building seemed to shift around them. "The stairs!" Sam shouted, but when they reached the spot where the staircase had been, it was gone. "This can't be happening," Emily cried, tears streaming down her face. The hallway stretched endlessly before them, its walls now smeared with dripping streaks of blood. The laughter returned, mingling with the sound of footsteps chasing them. One by one, the group was separated. Sarah's screams echoed from a distant classroom, followed by a deafening silence. Sam was dragged into the shadows, claw marks streaking the dusty floor where he had tried to hold on. Ethan and Emily were the only ones left, but they knew escape was impossible. the girl reappeared before them, her glowing red eyes locking onto Ethan. She smiled, revealing her razor-sharp teeth. "You'll stay with me forever," she whispered. The last thing Ethan saw was the red light engulfing him. The next morning, Linwood High stood silent and undisturbed, as it had for decades. But locals began to report strange occurrences. At night, flickering red lights could be seen in the windows, and distorted laughter echoed through the surrounding woods. Some claimed to see new figures standing beside the ghostly girl, a boy with empty eyes and a girl who silently wept blood. The curse of Linwood High continued, its victims forever trapped within the nightmare, warning those who dared to enter. You shouldn't have come here. Story 5. The House of Num 13. On a cold winter day in a small, remote town, there was a house shrouded in mystery deep within the woods. Known as House Number 13, it was a place no one dared to approach. For decades, anyone curious or foolish enough to step inside never returned. People whispered that on full moon nights, the house emitted screams as if echoing from another dimension. A group of friends, Mark, Liam, Sophie, and Emily, had heard countless tales about the house. One evening, while sitting around a campfire, they received a strange postcard. Scrawled in messy red ink, the card bore only one sentence: "Come to house number 13 if you want to discover the truth about yourself." The group thought it was some kind of prank. None of them knew where the postcard had come from or who sent it. "It's probably just a joke," Mark said, trying to sound brave. "We should check it out. Maybe it's some kind of escape room or fun mystery game." Sophie hesitated. "But what about the stories? Everyone says people never come back from there." "Stories are just stories," Liam said with a shrug, though his tone betrayed his unease. Emily, silent as always, felt a chill creep up her spine at the thought of the house. In the end, curiosity won out, and they decided to investigate. That evening, they followed a narrow trail through the forest that led to the house. It was an old, decrepit building with crumbling walls and windows boarded up with rotting wood. Bathed in the pale glow of the moon, the house stood like a massive sleeping beast. The front door creaked open as if inviting them in. As the group stepped inside, the door slammed shut behind them. "Just the wind," Mark muttered, though his voice wavered. Inside, the air was thick and cold, filled with the scent of dampness and decay. The walls were lined with faded portraits, but the faces in the paintings were smudged, as if someone had deliberately erased them. Suddenly, a chandelier flickered to life, casting a dim light over a dusty room. At the center of the room stood a wooden table with 4 silver keys and a handwritten note. "Welcome. Each of you must take a key. Do not try to escape, for you already belong to this place." "This has to be some elaborate prank," Sophie said, her voice trembling. No one answered. The silence in the house felt alive, as if the walls themselves were breathing, watching. Each of them picked up a key, feeling an icy chill run through their hands. At the far end of the room were 4 doors, each marked with a number: 1, 2, 3, and 4. Emily whispered nervously, "What does the note say next?" Mark read aloud the rest of the letter. "Each of you must step through 1 door. Your key will unlock the door meant for you. Behind the door lies the truth, or your punishment. The choice is yours, but once you step inside, there is no turning back." Despite their fear, they felt an invisible force pulling them toward the doors. One by one, they unlocked and entered their respective rooms, not knowing what awaited them. Mark entered a dimly lit room where a single candle flickered weakly. At the center of the room stood a massive mirror with blood-red writing across its surface. "Face yourself, or the darkness will consume your soul." He hesitated, but moved closer to the mirror. Instead of seeing his reflection, he saw a distorted version of himself. His eyes glowing red, his mouth twisted into a sinister grin. The figure in the mirror spoke. "You're a liar. You live in denial, and now you'll face the truth." Mark screamed, but his gaze was locked on the mirror. The twisted version of himself reached out, grabbing his throat and dragging him into the mirror. His screams echoed into nothingness. Sophie found herself in a long, narrow hallway. Hands emerged from the walls, clawing at her, trying to drag her into the darkness. A soft, yet haunting voice echoed around her. "You've always been afraid, always running. But this time, there's no escape." She tried to run, but the hallway stretched endlessly, and the laughter of unseen entities surrounded her, growing louder and more distorted. Emily stood in a pitch-black room. Dozens of glowing eyes floated in the air, staring at her, piercing through her very soul. A deep, guttural voice spoke. "You hide your weakness, but I see it all. You will never escape me." The eyes closed in on her, and she felt herself sinking into an endless abyss. Liam entered an empty room, but the sound of a child crying filled the space. In the corner, he saw a small figure. A child crouched with its back turned to him. As he approached, the figure turned, revealing a face that was nothing but a giant, gaping mouth. It lunged at him, consuming him whole. None of them left house number 13. The next morning, locals found the front door ajar. Inside, the wooden table still stood, but the 4 silver keys were now charred and blackened. Some say that on dark, moonless nights, faint screams can be heard from the house, mingling with distorted laughter. If you're brave, or foolish, enough to step inside, you might see the shadows of 4 figures wandering the halls, forever trapped by the house's curse. And if you listen closely, you'll hear the house whisper, "You belong to me now." Story 6. Burning in Hell. Together. Lydia had always felt a pull toward darkness. While others were frightened by the unknown, she found herself captivated by it, often wandering through cemeteries or old, abandoned places that whispered of forgotten lives. One fateful evening, as the autumn wind howled through the skeletal trees, she found herself at the gates of an ancient crypt, hidden deep within the woods. The crypt had no name, only a single inscription on the door. "To enter here is to embrace eternity in the arms of death." Lydia, ever the seeker of forbidden knowledge, pushed open the heavy stone door. The air inside was thick and cold, and the dim glow of her lantern revealed carvings of skeletal figures entwined in a macabre dance. At the center of the crypt stood a throne made of bone, and on it sat a figure unlike anything she had ever seen. A skeletal man cloaked in shadows looked up at her. His hollow eye sockets glowed faintly, as though 2 dying embers burned within them. His bony hands rested on the armrests of his throne, and his presence exuded both terror and allure. "You are brave," the figure rasped, his voice echoing like the whispers of the damned. "Or foolish. Why do you disturb my slumber?" Lydia felt no fear, only fascination. "I was drawn here. Who are you?" "I am Malric," he replied, "the harbinger of despair, the ruler of what lies beyond life. To know me is to know pain. To stay is to lose your soul." Lydia smiled faintly. "Perhaps I have nothing to lose." Days turned into weeks, and Lydia found herself returning to the crypt night after night. She and Malric spoke of the world, of life, of death, and the fragile line that separated them. Despite his warnings, she was not repelled by his grotesque form or his ominous nature. Instead, she felt an inexplicable connection to him. "You are not like the others," Malric said one evening. "All who have come before you fled at the sight of me. But you stay. Because I see beauty in you, Lydia replied, her voice steady. You see what will destroy you, he said, leaning forward, his skeletal fingers brushing a strand of hair from her face. I am hell, Lydia. To love me is to burn. Then let me burn, she whispered. Malric stared at her for a long moment, his ember-like eyes flickering brighter. Very well, he said. But know this. Once you cross the threshold, there is no return. One night, as the moon hung heavy and crimson in the sky, Malric led Lydia deeper into the crypt. They entered a grand hall where the walls seemed alive, etched with moving shadows of the damned. At the center of the room was an altar made of black obsidian. Malric extended a hand. If you choose to stay, you must bind yourself to me. Eternity is a heavy burden, Lydia. You will be part of me, my queen in darkness, and you will never see the light again. Without hesitation, Lydia placed her hand in his. Malric spoke in an ancient tongue, and the room filled with the sound of mournful wails. The air grew hotter, as though the very fires of hell had been summoned. Flames rose around them, but Lydia did not flinch. I bind my soul to yours, Malric declared, his voice resonating with unearthly power. You have chosen to burn with me, Lydia. Together we will reign over despair. The flames consumed them both, and when they subsided, Lydia was no longer the woman she had been. Her skin was as pale as the moon, her eyes glowed with an inner fire, and a dark crown adorned her head. Lydia and Malric became rulers of the forgotten, guiding lost souls who wandered into their realm. Their love was both beautiful and terrifying, a union forged in agony but sustained by a passion that defied mortality. Rumors of the crypt began to spread, tales of a skeletal king and his pale bride who could grant immortality at a terrible cost. Many ventured to the crypt, lured by the promise of power or the hope of seeing loved ones again. None returned unchanged. Why do they come? Lydia asked Malric one night as they watched a desperate soul plead for his life before the altar. Because mortals fear death, Malric replied. They fear the unknown. But they do not understand that death is not an ending. It is a transformation. You, my queen, are proof of that. As centuries passed, Lydia began to feel the weight of eternity. Though she loved Malric with all her soul, she longed for the warmth of the sun, the laughter of children, and the simple joys of mortal life. I chose this, she said one night, her voice tinged with sadness. But I did not understand the cost. Malric cupped her face in his skeletal hands. Regret is the curse of immortality. I warned you, my love. Hell is not flames or torment. It is the loss of what was once cherished. Then why do we continue? She asked, tears streaming down her face. Because we are bound, he said, and even in despair, there is beauty. You are my light in the darkness, Lydia. Without you, I would be nothing. Lydia remained by Malric's side, her love for him burning as fiercely as the flames of their realm. Together, they ruled over the shadows, their bond unbroken. In time, they became legend. Some said they were a cautionary tale, a warning of the dangers of surrendering to the unknown. Others believed they were a testament to love's power to transcend all boundaries, even those of life and death. And so, in the depths of the crypt, the skeletal king and his pale bride continued their dance through eternity. Two souls entwined in a fire that would never fade. She knew I was hell, yet she chose to burn with me. Story 7. The Curse of the Red-Eyed Oni. Deep in the misty mountains of Japan, Hidden amidst crimson maple trees lies a forgotten village known as Akuma no Mura, the Demon's Village. Centuries ago, it was a prosperous place, until one fateful night when an unspeakable tragedy occurred. The villagers told tales of an outcast woman, Kana, who was accused of witchcraft after a series of misfortunes plagued the village. Crops failed, livestock died, and children vanished into the forest. Desperate and fearful, the villagers blamed Kana, believing her to be cursed. Despite her pleas of innocence, the villagers dragged Kana to the edge of the forest, bound her to a post, and set her ablaze. Her screams echoed through the valley, filled with anguish and rage. As the flames consumed her, her dying curse rang out. "You have taken my life, but I will take your souls. I will return, and you will all burn in the fires of your sins." From that day, Akuma no Mura was abandoned. Travelers who wandered too close to the village spoke of seeing a figure with glowing red eyes and a twisted, skeletal grin lurking in the shadows. They called her the Redeyed Oni, the vengeful spirit of Kana. Hundreds of years later, a group of adventurers, Hiroshi, Aiko, Takeshi, and Mina, decided to visit Akuma no Mura. The village had become infamous among thrill seekers and ghost hunters as one of the most haunted places in Japan. Hiroshi, the group's self-proclaimed leader, grinned as they hiked through the forest. "Come on, it's just an old legend. If we're lucky, we'll get some cool footage for our channel." Aiko, ever the skeptic, rolled her eyes. "You say that now, but you'll be the first to scream if we actually see something." Mina, clutching her camera tightly, glanced nervously at the trees. "The stories about this place, they don't sound like just legends. What if Kana's spirit is real?" "Then we'll catch her on camera," Takeshi joked, though his uneasy tone betrayed his bravado. As they reached the edge of the village, the forest grew unnaturally quiet. The vibrant red leaves of the maple trees seemed to glow eerily under the fading sunlight, casting an ominous hue over the crumbling houses and moss-covered paths. The group explored the village, their footsteps echoing in the silence. They found broken pottery, rusted tools, and decaying wooden structures, all signs of a place long forgotten. "Look at this," Aiko said, picking up an old, charred doll from the ground. Its face was melted, its eyes hollow. Mina gasped. That's horrifying. It's like it was burned." Suddenly, a cold wind swept through the village, carrying with it a faint whisper. "Leave." Hiroshi turned sharply. "Did you hear that?" "Hear what?" Takeshi asked, though his eyes darted nervously around. "It sounded like someone said, 'Leave,'" Hiroshi replied. "Probably just the wind," Aiko said, but even she couldn't hide the tremble in her voice. Unconvinced, the group pressed on. As they ventured deeper, the atmosphere grew heavier. Mina, walking at the back of the group, felt as though someone or something was watching her. When she turned, she saw it. A pale figure standing amidst the trees. It had long black hair, and its eyes glowed an unnatural red. The figure grinned, revealing rows of jagged, sharp teeth. Mina screamed, and the figure disappeared. "Are you sure you saw something?" Hiroshi asked as Mina tried to catch her breath. "I know what I saw," she insisted. "It was her, the Red-Eyed Oni." Before they could decide what to do, the sun dipped below the horizon, plunging the village into darkness. Hiroshi lit a lantern, its flickering light casting eerie shadows on the ground. "Let's stick together," he said. "We'll leave in the morning." But as they made their way to one of the abandoned houses, the air grew colder, and the faint sound of laughter echoed through the village. It wasn't human. It was distorted, high-pitched, and filled with malice. Inside the house, the group huddled together, too afraid to sleep. Suddenly, the laughter stopped, replaced by a loud, scraping sound. Aiko pointed to the doorway, her face pale. "Look!" Claw marks appeared on the wooden door, carved by invisible hands. Then, The door burst open, and the red-eyed Oni stood before them. Her twisted face was illuminated by the lantern's light, and her glowing eyes burned with fury. "You should not have come here," she hissed. "Your souls are mine." The group scattered in terror, each running blindly into the night. Hiroshi sprinted through the forest, the sound of footsteps following him. When he looked back, the Oni was right behind him, her skeletal grin growing wider. She lunged at him, and his scream was swallowed by the night. Aiko and Takeshi ran together, but were separated when the ground beneath them seemed to shift. Takeshi tripped and fell, and before Aiko could help him, the Oni appeared, dragging him into the shadows. Aiko stumbled into the remains of a shrine. She knelt before it, praying desperately for protection. For a moment, it seemed to work. The air grew still. But when she opened her eyes, the Oni was standing over her, grinning. "You cannot escape me," the Oni whispered, her voice like nails on glass. Mina, the last of the group, found herself back at the edge of the village. The trees seemed to close in around her, and the whispers grew louder. "Kana," she called out, her voice shaking. "We didn't mean to disturb you. Please, let me go." The Oni emerged from the shadows, her red eyes glowing like embers. "You dare speak my name?" Mina fell to her knees. "I'm sorry, please." The Oni leaned closer, her grin impossibly wide. "If you wish to live, you must take my place. Stay here, and I will let you go." Tears streaming down her face, Mina nodded. "I'll stay." The next morning, villagers passing near the forest found a single shoe at the edge of the trees, but the group was never seen again. Travelers who now dared to visit Akuma no Mura speak of a figure with glowing red eyes, standing among the crimson trees. Some say it's Kana, but others insist it's a new Oni, her face hidden behind her long black hair. If you listen closely, they say, you can still hear the whispers. Leave, or stay forever. Story 8. The Seven Shadows. In a crumbling, ancient monastery atop a lonely hill, there lay an ornate book bound in black leather. On its cover, an inscription was etched in silver. "Speak my riddle, face my sin." No one had dared touch the book for centuries. Monks once whispered that it held the essence of humanity's darkest impulses, 7 deadly sins bound together by an ancient curse. But as the years passed, the stories faded into obscurity, and the monastery was abandoned. One stormy evening, a curious young scholar named Elliot ventured into the ruins. Desperate for knowledge and recognition, he believed that uncovering the monastery's secrets would cement his name in history. As thunder roared above and lightning illuminated the dilapidated walls, he found the book. Its silver inscription seemed to glow in the dim light. Turning the brittle pages, Elliot read aloud the riddle. "I live in the heart, I poison the soul, in 7 forms I take my toll. I hunger for more, yet never am full. I lie in the lazy, the proud, and the cruel. I burn with a fire, I freeze with disdain, I lust for desires, both pleasure and pain. I envy what others hold dear in their hand, but I turn their joy into sinking sand. What am I, hidden within, taking shape as the deadliest sin? What am I?" The words echoed around him, and the air grew thick and cold. A whisper, faint yet chilling, brushed past his ears. "Do you seek the answer, Elliot?" Ignoring the warning in the voice, Elliot answered, "Sin. You are sin." The room shuddered violently, and a sudden wind blew through the monastery, extinguishing his lantern. When the darkness lifted, Elliot was no longer alone. Before him stood 7 shadowy figures, each more terrifying than the last. They were not fully human, but grotesque manifestations, their features twisted to reflect the sins they embodied. The first figure, Pride, stood tall, its face obscured by a golden mask, its hands adorned with jewels. Its eyes glowed with arrogance, and it looked down on Elliot as if he were nothing. The second, Greed, was hunched and gaunt, clutching coins and treasures that spilled from its hands. Its eyes darted around as though searching for more to hoard. Lust was ethereal and seductive, with a body shrouded in veils that seemed to writhe like living things. Envy was skeletal and green-skinned, its sunken eyes burning with hatred and desire for what it could not have. Gluttony was grotesquely bloated, its mouth constantly moving as though chewing invisible food. Wrath radiated fire and fury, its form flickering with the rage of an unending inferno. And finally, Sloth, an amorphous, sluggish mass, barely moved, its hollow eyes filled with apathy. Elliot staggered backward. What are you?" Pride stepped forward, its voice smooth and commanding. "We are the Seven Shadows, the sins of humanity made flesh. And now that you've summoned us, you must choose. Will you confront us, or will you succumb?" Pride led Elliot into a grand hall filled with mirrors. Each one reflected a version of himself, taller, stronger, more successful. In one mirror, he saw himself crowned as a king. In another, he stood atop a podium, adored by millions. "These are your desires," Pride whispered. "You wish to be greater than you are. You crave recognition, adoration. But tell me, Elliot, how far will you go to achieve it?" Elliot hesitated, captivated by the visions. Pride extended a hand. "Take it, and you shall have the life you've always dreamed of." But as Elliot reached out, the mirrors shattered, and the shards reflected a different truth. The faces of those he would trample to achieve his ambitions. Friends, family, strangers. Guilt twisted in his stomach. "No," Elliot said firmly, "I will not be consumed by you." Pride sneered but stepped back. "Very well. But the others will not be so merciful." Greed led him into a cavern filled with gold, jewels, and treasures beyond imagination. The air shimmered with promises of wealth and power. "All of this can be yours," Greed hissed, its voice like clinking coins. "You've worked so hard for so little. Isn't it time you were rewarded?" Elliot's hands itched to touch the gold, but as he reached for it, the treasures began to decay, turning into ash. Around him, he saw others who had succumbed, figures clutching their riches as their bodies withered away into skeletons. "Is this what you want?" Greed mocked. Elliot stepped away. "Wealth means nothing if it destroys me." Greed shrieked in frustration, its form dissolving into smoke. "The others will break you." Lust appeared as a beautiful figure, its form constantly shifting to match Elliot's deepest desires. Its voice was soft, intoxicating, promising pleasure and escape from all pain. "Why fight?" Lust whispered, drawing closer. "Give in to me, and I will take away your burdens." But as Lust touched his face, Elliot saw visions of people trapped in endless cycles of longing and despair, their faces hollow and empty. He pushed Lust away. "I will not lose myself to you." Lust's seductive smile twisted into a snarl, and it vanished into the darkness. One by one, Elliot faced the remaining sins. Envy tormented him with visions of what others had, whispering that he would never be enough. Gluttony tried to drown him in excess, while wrath tempted him with vengeance against those who had wronged him. Each time, Elliot resisted, though the battles left him drained and trembling. Finally, he faced Sloth, whose form loomed over him like a dark cloud. "You are tired," it said, its voice a slow, monotonous drone. "Give up, rest, let it all fade away." Elliot sank to his knees, overwhelmed by the weight of his struggles. For a moment, he considered surrendering, But then he remembered why he had come: to seek knowledge, not ruin. "I will not give up," he whispered, forcing himself to stand. "I will not be consumed." Sloth sighed, its form dissolving into nothingness. "Few have resisted, but your journey is not over." The 7 sins reappeared, circling Elliot like vultures. Pride stepped forward once more. "You have resisted us, but you are not free. The curse of sin lives within every heart. Tell us, Elliot, what will you do with this knowledge?" Elliot clenched his fists. "I will carry it. I will teach others to face their sins, to fight back." The sins laughed, a terrible, echoing sound. "Then go," they said as one. "But remember, we are always watching, always waiting." Epilogue. The shadow within Elliot emerged from the monastery at dawn, the book clutched tightly in his hands. He had survived, but he knew he would never be the same. The shadows of the 7 lingered in his mind, whispering temptations he would battle for the rest of his life. The riddle had been answered, but the curse was eternal. "I am sin, hidden within, taking shape as the deadliest kin. What am I? I am you." Story 9. The Cursed Templar. In the twilight of the Crusades, as blood stained the Holy Lands and the cries of the dying echoed across desolate plains, there existed a knight unlike any other. Known as Lucian of Blackmoor, he was a Templar sworn to defend the faith, his blade cutting through enemies with the precision of divine wrath. His armor bore the crimson cross of the Order, and his heart burned with unyielding zeal. But Lucian harbored a secret, a shadow in his soul that he dared not reveal even to his brothers in arms. His prayers had long turned hollow, and his faith had been corroded by the horrors he had witnessed. The bloodshed, the endless war, the cries of innocence. It weighed on him, breaking him piece by piece. One fateful night, in the midst of a losing battle, Lucien knelt on the blood-soaked earth and made a desperate vow. "Deliver us from this suffering, O Lord, or give me the power to end it, no matter the cost." His whispered prayer did not go unanswered. As the battlefield fell silent, Lucien found himself surrounded by the charred remains of men, both friend and foe. The air was thick with ash, and the faint smell of sulfur lingered. Among the smoke, a figure emerged, a man cloaked in black, his face obscured by shadow. "You called, and I answered," the figure said, his voice smooth and chilling. Lucien gripped his sword. "Who are you?" "Someone who can grant your wish," the stranger replied. "You desire power to end the suffering, to bring an end to this endless war. I can give it to you, for a price." Lucien hesitated. "What price?" "Your soul," the figure said simply. Lucien stared at the corpses around him, the faces of his fallen comrades haunting his mind. He thought of the years of bloodshed, the prayers that went unheard, and the promise of salvation that never came. "I accept," he said, his voice barely a whisper. The stranger smiled, and with a wave of his hand, darkness engulfed Lucian. When Lucian awoke, he found himself alone in the ashes of the battlefield. In his hand was a sword unlike any other, a blade forged of black steel, its hilt adorned with runes that pulsed with an eerie red glow. "Use it wisely," the stranger's voice echoed in his mind. "It will grant you power beyond mortal comprehension. But beware, it feeds on death and despair. The more you use it, the closer you come to losing yourself." Lucian returned to his order, the blade concealed. His brothers in arms welcomed him back, unaware of the darkness that now dwelled within him. With the cursed sword in hand, Lucian became an unstoppable force on the battlefield, cutting down entire armies single-handedly. Victory followed wherever he went, but with each life he took, the blade grew heavier and the whispers in his mind grew louder. As years passed, Lucian's reputation as a savior turned to fear. His fellow knights began to whisper of his inhuman strength and the unsettling glow that emanated from his sword. Some claimed they saw shadows moving around him, even in daylight. One night, as his brothers prepared to march into battle, Lucien overheard them plotting against him. "He's no longer one of us," one whispered. "He's cursed." "We cannot trust him," said another. "We must end this before he turns on us." Lucien's heart sank. These were the men he had fought alongside, bled for, and yet they now saw him as a monster. When the attack came, Lucien had no choice but to defend himself. The cursed blade sang as it cut through his brothers, their cries of betrayal echoing in his ears. By dawn, the once proud Order of Blackmoor lay in ruins, its halls stained with the blood of those who had called him a comrade. Consumed by guilt, Lucien fled into exile. He wandered the desolate lands, haunted by the faces of those he had killed. The sword, now bound to him, whispered constantly, urging him to take more lives, to give in to the hunger. He knelt in an abandoned chapel, his armor tarnished and his cloak torn. For the first time in years he prayed, not for power, but for forgiveness. "Is redemption still possible for someone like me?" he whispered. The only response was silence. Determined to atone, Lucien swore to use the blade only to protect the innocent and to destroy those who brought harm to others. He became a wandering knight, a ghost of the past, his presence feared and revered in equal measure. But the blade's whispers never ceased, and with every battle, the line between savior and monster grew thinner. Decades later, Lucien found himself standing before a village under siege by a horde of raiders. The villagers pleaded for his help, their eyes filled with desperation. As the raiders approached, the sword's voice grew louder. "Let me feast," it urged. "Give me their blood, and you will save them." Lucien hesitated. He knew what would happen if he unleashed the blade's full power. He would lose another piece of himself. But the cries of the villagers cut through his doubt. With a roar, he drew the sword, its crimson glow illuminating the night. The raiders fell before him like wheat before the scythe, their screams swallowed by the blade's unholy hunger. When the battle ended, Lucien stood alone, the villagers too terrified to approach him. He dropped to his knees, the sword slipping from his grasp. "Is this the cost of salvation?" he whispered. Legends of the cursed Templar spread far and wide. Some called him a hero, a protector of the weak. Others saw him as a harbinger of death, a knight damned by his own ambition. Lucien remained bound to the blade, wandering the lands in search of redemption he feared he would never find. On moonless nights, travelers speak of a hooded knight kneeling in prayer, his crimson-crossed armor glinting faintly in the dark. They say his sword hums with a sinister power, and if you get too close, you might hear its whispers. "Give in. Let me feast." But if you dare approach the knight, he will look up, his eyes heavy with sorrow, and warn you. "This path is mine alone to walk. Turn back before it claims you too." Story 10. The Harbinger of Shadows. In every culture and every age, there has been a figure that embodies the inevitable: death. Known by many names, the Grim Reaper, the Harbinger, the Shadow Walker, this specter has haunted humanity's collective imagination. With his tattered cloak and gleaming scythe, he is said to appear at the moment when life ends, guiding souls to their final destination. But few know the truth behind the legend. Few know the curse that binds the Reaper to his eternal task. He was not always a harbinger of death. He was once a man. Centuries ago, in a small, war-torn village, there lived a farmer named Arian. He was a simple man, devoted to his family and his land. But when famine struck and soldiers pillaged what little remained, Arian found himself standing at the edge of despair. One night, as Arian knelt by his wife's deathbed, he prayed desperately. "I will give anything," he whispered, "anything to save her." The candlelight in the room flickered, and a chill swept through the air. From the shadows, a figure emerged, a man cloaked in darkness, his face obscured beneath a hood. "I can grant your wish," the figure said, his voice cold and unfeeling. "I can save her, but all magic comes with a price." "What is it?" Arian asked, tears streaming down his face. The figure leaned closer. "Your life for hers. When the sun sets tomorrow, you will belong to me." Without hesitation, Arian agreed. By morning, Arian's wife had recovered. Her fever was gone, her strength returned, and she wept tears of joy as she embraced her husband. But Arian could not rejoice. He knew his time was short. When the sun dipped below the horizon, the figure returned, now holding a scythe that gleamed with an unnatural light. "You are mine now," the figure said, his tone final. Arian expected pain, but instead, he felt his body grow weightless. He looked down and saw himself lying lifeless on the ground. He tried to scream, but no sound came. The figure handed him the scythe. "Your soul is bound to this weapon. You will take my place as the harbinger of death. From this moment on, you will reap the souls of the dead." "No," Arian shouted. "I won't do it." The figure chuckled darkly. "You have no choice. The curse is sealed." For centuries, Arian walked the earth, unseen by the living. His tattered cloak became a part of him, and the scythe never left his hand. Wherever death struck, be it in battlefields, plagues, or peaceful homes, he was there, unseen but ever present. At first, he resisted his duty. He tried to leave the souls where they fell, hoping they could find their way without him. But when he defied the scythe, the souls would remain trapped, screaming in torment, unable to move on. He learned the hard truth. Without the Reaper, the balance between life and death would collapse. One fateful night, Arian came to claim the soul of a young woman named Lysara. She had died shielding her brother from an invading soldier's blade. Her soul, however, did not weep or wail like the others. "Why do you fight this fate?" Arian asked her, his voice a hollow echo. Lysara looked into the empty void beneath his hood and said, "Because there is still work for me to do. My brother will die without me." Arian hesitated. For the first time in centuries, he felt something stir within him, a flicker of the humanity he had long since buried. Against the pull of the scythe, he allowed Lysara to remain in the world as a spirit. But his defiance came at a cost. The sky darkened, and shadows coalesced around him. "You cannot alter fate," a voice thundered in his mind. "I will bear the punishment," Arian replied. For his defiance, Arian was bound even tighter to the scythe. Its whispers became screams, and its weight became unbearable. But he continued to fight against his curse, sparing those whose souls burned with purpose. Each act of defiance chipped away at his humanity. His memories of life began to fade, and the face of his wife, once so vivid, became a distant blur. One day, Arian was summoned to a battlefield where thousands lay dead. Among the corpses, he saw a figure waiting for him, the original Reaper, the one who had cursed him. "It is time," the Reaper said. "Your defiance has upset the balance. You must reap the souls you have spared, or you will face oblivion." "I will not," Arian said, gripping the scythe tightly. Then you will take their place, the Reaper growled. He raised his hand, and the souls Arian had spared appeared around him, their faces twisted in anguish. Arian looked at them, his heart breaking. I will not let you take them, he said. He drove the scythe into the ground, and its red glow erupted into a blinding light. The souls around him were freed, their forms dissolving into beams of light that ascended to the heavens. The Reaper roared in anger, but Arian stood firm. Take me instead, he said. You are already mine, the Reaper replied. Arian became a legend. Some say he still walks the earth, his scythe no longer a tool of destruction but a beacon of hope. Others believe he was destroyed, his soul finally at rest. But travelers tell of a shadowy figure that appears at the moment of death, cloaked in black and wielding a scythe that hums with ancient power. If you look into the void beneath his hood, they say, you might hear his whisper, "Fear not, for I will guide you." And if you listen closely, you might even hear the faint echo of a long-lost prayer. Deliver us from suffering.